So let Nigerians know clearly, Honorable Minister, what the plan really is. Which part of the schools are opening? When will the schools fully open? And perhaps give us a sense of the safety measures that your ministry and the federal government has put in place.
And good evening, viewers, fellow Nigerians. I would like to begin by explaining that, in truth, what was announced on Monday is not really a resumption of school. We had asked that schools around the country please allow students to go home and operate from home. No schooling had been taking place, nothing of the sort. But the schools themselves, with their employees, some of them are government officers. But what we announced on Monday wasn't a school reopening. What we did was that we presented to the PTF and, by extension, the federal government of Nigeria, the plans by examination bodies to hold their exams. The exams are critical for how children progress. And we examined it, and we felt that it is important to allow those examinations to take place. But that ahead of them taking place, because we know that our schools are going to be used as venue for all of this, that it is important that those children who have not had the opportunity to revise their syllable or go through the curriculum that have been set out for them should have an opportunity to go through all of that and have a revision class before the exams. If there are people who are comfortable, most people who can afford it already are saying that they want to be at home and go to the exams from home. That is terrific. We had set out our rules over this time to show people how to get online and so on. But we understand the limitations of, well, I say the average Nigerian, because most of the people who can afford laptops and the devices, and you saw in Lagos today, distributing ordinary radios has been very hectic. And we know that our children, or not all of them, have the same access. And if there are people who do have this access and who feel confident that their children are ready for the exams, we don't have, nobody's compelling anybody to actually go to any school. What we have done is make the facilities of our schools available. You all know that education is on the concurrent legislative list, and we've asked that state governments that own these schools, this is what we plan. We think each school should have places to wash your hands, check check the temperature of the children constantly, have sanitizers in place. Private schools should be able to provide theirs, and state government should be able to provide theirs. The federal government owns I think just about 104 unity colleges, and already the PTAs and the SBMs will meet as to how those they want to open and those they don't want to open. So it's really not a compulsion. We're just making the facilities available for the purposes of taking the exams, for those who want to take the exams, because there are also people who may not actually want to take the exams, but it would not be a responsible act by government to then say, because there are some people who may not want, that we should not make available the facilities for those who may want. Because life is a continuous journey of choices, and children have been at home. Those of them who are able to have access to the internet and be able to be learning, or are using any of the devices to access what we've provided and have been learning, we congratulate them. We think they should do that more. We've appealed to parents to please continue to help. But my job is at the Ministry of Ministry of Education is to oversee what is going on in Nigeria generally and all over the country. A country of 36 states with and a federal capital territory with nearly 200 million people, with nearly 30 million of us in schools. We know for a fact that less than 10%, 20% of our actual population have access to this. We have 1.56 million children registered for WAEC this year, and we know that internet penetration amongst this group still less than 300,000 students have access to the internet. So it will be height of injustice not to make available facilities for others to learn.
Honorable Minister,
but then there's no compulsion.
Okay, great. Before we go into the
classes, to simply work in and take their exams, that's all.
All right, before we go into the nitty-gritty of the plans on those who wants to go for examination to go back, because you're clarifying these issues now, and people are knowing that it is not compulsory to go back to school. But then let's first and foremost get the view, or your view, on the projection. Do you have a projection on a possible date of full school resumption?
Full school resumption would be a matter of detail with the data we have. The children we're inviting into schools, or the ones at the moment, our school students are basically from 5 years to about 19. Is the lowest heat age bracket with the COVID, but we're not taking any chances with them. We have to wait and look at what the data shows before we can announce a proper resumption of school. Truly speaking, for all the classes, we don't mind all the suggestions that we've received from stakeholders in the educational ecosystem, that you can actually gradient them to the next level without necessarily, you can use a couple of tools of assessment, continuous assessment provisions, work they've done before. We can use all of that in an attempt to move them to the next rung of the ladder. But that is not the same thing for an examination class. An exiting class. The exiting classes, we are provided them with a certification to go to the next level. That's what this is about. We will take on the idea of reopening schools as we know it at a later date, but that is speaking only to the science and the data, because we've been having constant communication with all the National Center for Disease Control, the Ministry of Health. We are constantly on top of coming to take exams at those aged between 10 and 19. So between that, is this 9-year bracket, we've seen the lowest in infection rates. We know that children at the moment, they're at home, they mingle with their own parents or with friends, or with those who go to the market and come back, or those who go to the mosque or churches and come back. They do all kinds of activities. Some of them, those that are well off, can afford to keep their children watching TV, but some are using their children as hawkers. We're losing people who we're trying to bring back to school. And if we do not do anything about this, we will just lose all the children altogether, and you'll probably be not able to return them to school eventually. But all of that is within our contemplation. But that is not to say we're going to then put the children all at once in school at risk. The idea behind having a few, which constitute maybe less than 20% of the school population at any time, to be around at this time for these exams, is such that you can afford to use all the classes to just have a few. So you can achieve social distancing, you can achieve using the limited facilities available in the school to continue.
So if I may butt in quickly,
your manpower to be able to.
So, Honorable Minister, if I may butt in quickly again, just in about 1 minute or less before we go on our first break on the program, how do you speak to teachers who say they are afraid, because it does look like the plans you are making is only for students? What about the teachers that will teach them? What do you say to those teachers who say that they do not want to die and they are not ready to go back to school until they see concrete plans for them?
I will say that the affairs are actually correct. It is important that they look at what we are also discussing with their schools, because we've also said all the facilities that are available in the schools must be available to the teachers. The washing of hands, thermometers, sanitizers, what kind of tests that they require, access to our emergency lines, whatever they require. Today in Nigeria, it is very difficult to say anybody moving out without masks. So the Federal Ministry of Education is not about to embark on a journey of sewing masks for everybody, because we already know that everybody has been asked over these past 6-7 weeks to wear masks and be able to use them. So we're not going to be saying because we want teachers back, we need to make separate masks for them. We want them to take the same cautions that everybody has. However, what we're trying to do is we want to have that kind of the rapprochement with them, such that anything that they need to make this happen in their particular schools, the federal government and the state governments and owners of schools will be available to make that. You make those kind of rapprochement with them. We are
All right.
to...
A big question here is what we have seen in other climes. For example, there is a phased resumption of schools in some other climes where you have maybe primary 1 to 3 at a certain hour, maybe the first 4 or 5 hours of the day, primary 4 to 6, in another 3 or 4 hours of the day, thereby decreasing the number of contact and spacing them out. Is the government thinking in that regard? Because the question is, how long can you keep these children out of school?
Well, my brother Shem and the rest of Nigeria, this is exactly what we're trying to do with trying to get the exit classes out of the way. We're not just trying to get them out of the way. We're trying to manage the number that is available so that we can do all of what you've just said. We can rotate them. We can have mixed classes. We can have different sort of class sizes. We can have different cadres of classes coming in at different times of the day. We're working on all of those scenarios. But at the root of that is, first of all, getting the exit classes out. Once we're able to deal with those who we must manage uniformly, because the exams brings all of them together. So we must manage them uniformly. There's no way to say to those who are going to take WAEC, don't come or at different times. You're going to have a problem with that. So we want to use all of our facilities now to just manage this number that are exiting. Once we're done with them, we can then rearrange classes as they suit local needs. Because you see, even this year's WAEC, we're working on even taking some of them outside the classroom, maybe in the fields where the permits. There are so many things we've worked on, but we will need to take them one at a time. Everything that you've talked about, morning classes to afternoon classes, different class sizes for different streams, reduction in how many hours each teacher takes, all of that are in the works. But at the root of all of them is being able to manage this transition properly.
But, Honorable Minister, when will that happen? The phase resumption that you just explained, when will that happen? How soon will this happen?
I am not going to immediately give you a date, because the data from the National Center for Disease Control will inform that. It is not, right now, Nigeria's numbers are not peaking yet. We want to be able to see where the peak are and examine the numbers and how it relates to all our teachers, how it will relate to all the various local governments. Right now, we are going for almost precision lockdowns in some 18 to 20 local governments where this is most prevalent and where the community transmission is taking place a whole lot. And many of them are in the urban centers. And we're looking at what state governors want to do as well, because you see, Nigeria and education being on the concurrent list, and we talking with the subnationals, they have a lot of powers over their own schools and their institutions. The country is large with 13,000 primary schools. We're not looking at primary schools immediately, because only those who are going to be taking their common entrance exams will be invited only for one Saturday to take the common entrance and return home. Those don't need revision class anywhere in any school or in any primary school. We're not opening any of the primary schools at all. The secondary schools where the Becker exams and NAPTEB, NECO, and WAEC exams are going to be taking place are the only ones that are allowed to even get into this revision class requirement. if they think their children are all well to do and they cannot and they can afford to go there and take the exams and come out in shining, oh, well, thank God. But if those who have the ability to organize these classes and make sure that they are running a stream and their curriculums are covered and the syllables are met, then we would avail them all our facilities with the guidance that we have provided, and asking all the owners of schools to please provide.
Yeah. So let's conclude this conversation, and it's going to be our final question tonight is going to be on the issues of infrastructure. When COVID-19 came, it exposed the nation, it exposed Nigeria in our vulnerable areas. For example, our healthcare facilities, our healthcare system, we know it's in a deplorable situation. And perhaps the education sector is far as bad as the healthcare system in Nigeria. There are no classrooms in some schools. There are no writing materials in some schools. In some tertiary institutions, there are no seating. There are no classrooms for students to sit. Students are overpopulated than the facilities that are provided. So in the healthcare system, governments across the state and the federal government are building isolation centers. So we've seen this exposure also in the education system. Has there been any intentional move in fixing this dilapidated and deplorable state of our education sector?
Well, like all Nigerians will also realize, the problem of education as in health, all the social sectors, actually stems from the fact that they are on the concurrent list. So the federal government can't possibly be doing everything everywhere at the same time. State governors are pulling their weight as all the states are not equal, really, in terms of infrastructure and their needs. And therefore, we had, over time, when I was in the House of Reps in the 1990s, we came up with this bill on UBEC. And that was how UBEC became law, trying to assist state governors to establish this infrastructure. That has gone a long way in helping everybody come to some sort of level, but that's not enough. Around the country, infrastructure are owned by private individuals or private businesses. They are also owned by federal government, and then they are also, majority are owned by state governments. And the state of infrastructure is really appalling in some areas. Many public-spirited individuals have also tried to help. You've heard about the Dangote Foundation. You've heard of the Oando Foundation. We have our own foundation, which I run with a few young men, the Repair Nigeria Foundation, that's also repairing schools around the country. So around the country, people are making a lot of effort. Old boys, old girls, associations, everybody is calling me and they're helping. We thank everybody. But to answer you really is that government doesn't have that kind of resources now, because one of the things that also has come with COVID is that the Nigeria's economy was badly eroded. We owe a lot of money around the world trying to build the major infrastructures that are here, and then most of our income goes to servicing those debts. For over 20 years now, Nigeria has had debts that were borrowed to do a lot of things. So as the little money you earn goes into servicing all of that. However, with the interface of the little state governors are able to do, the federal government is doing with international organizations, you say the UNESCO's, the World Bank, everybody's throwing their support around helping with infrastructure around the country. We're doing quite a bit. So that is a process that will continue. Like I told you, there are 135,000 such schools around Nigeria. So it takes a bit of time for all of that to happen. And no one person controls all of it.
All right, Honorable Minister.
We are pulling everybody together. At the SUBEB levels, we're asking everybody to get on the same wavelength with us. Some local governments are far flung. Some governors are doing some terrific work. Look at Yobe State. Look at Borno State. Zulum, some fantastic work in the last 1 year. A lot of people are working. In Imo State, I see what the new governor there is trying to project, looking at the new systems. Some governors actually mismanage the opportunities over time, and actually in some countries ought to be tried. I mean, look at the mess that was in Imo State for 8 years. But if you look at the opportunities others have had, they've tried to bring this thing to steam. We will continue along those lines to try to encourage them. The little resources,
Honorable
management
Minister.
of it, just the same thing you have
Yeah.
in the health sector. We've not
Yeah.
had the
So-
massive donations that the health sector has gotten from COVID or from everybody. Nobody has started the education sector emergency because it's not the same thing as the health emergency.